the idea of purchasing those very old, outdated beepers by the Hezbollah was because the Hezbollah suspected that Israel is monitoring their high sophisticated cell phones and so on. So they said to themselves, okay, let's go to the basic. Let's go to the letters. We cannot go to the letters and we cannot go to the pigeon that carries the message and so on. But what is next? Those old beepers, 50 years old beepers, that nobody will even think of using them in modern times, 2024. And so that was the reason that Hezbollah had purchased them, in order to enhance the security level of their interaction between the operators. And that was a big mistake on their behalf. There's a rule in espionage, in intelligence: always look for the mistakes. Always find where is this place is not covered. And this is exactly what had happened. Israel traced this mistake made by the Hezbollah and immediately endorsed it and immediately managed to create some sort of a facility that will use that on our benefit.
This is East to West. I'm your host, Sarah Martinez Amir, and today we mark 1 year since one of the most daring and sophisticated operations in Israel's recent history, the Mossad's beeper operation against Hezbollah in September 2024. It was an audacious intelligence move that not only crippled Hezbollah's communications network, but also sent shockwaves through the region, exposing each precision and psychological impact of Israel's intelligence services. To help us unpack the significance of this operation, its tactical brilliance, and its long-term implications, I'm joined by Oded Ailam, former senior officer in the Mossad and leading expert on counterterrorism and intelligence strategy. He's currently a researcher here at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs. Oded, thank you as always for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start right at the heart of it. We're 1 year on since the infamous beeper operation against Hezbollah, an extraordinary intelligence operation, not just from an operational standpoint, but in terms of the message is sent to Israel's enemies and allies alike. I'm curious to hear from you, your thoughts a year later.
I think we should look at what happened in a much broader perspective. What happened between the 17th of September and the 27th of September 2024 was a fundamental change in the course of the history of the Middle East. It's not just a simple operation of hit and run, but it's a fundamental change that touches all the ingredients of what is happening in the Middle East. And
it was sort of a domino effect, you could say.
Absolutely, and I will get to that in a moment. But very rarely you see an intelligence operation that has such an impact on the overall history or the overall, I would say, state of things that erupt such a tremendous change in the course of history. And I can say two examples that I recall from modern history. The first one is the breaking of the Enigma, the cipher, by the British in World War II. They did it in Bletchley Park. They did it Alan Turing, and with the huge team of genius and experts, they actually managed to decipher the German code, which brought enormous intelligence to the Allies, especially on the U-boats, but later on the army and so on. And Churchill himself said the breaking of the code of the Enigma had decreased by between 2 and 4 years the length of the war. And it actually changed the course of the war.
Right.
And this was an operation, an intelligence operation that actually, in fact, did it. The other example that I see that is also reflects the power of such an operation is in the 80s. In the 80s, it came across to the CIA that the Russians are planning to create a gas pipeline from Siberia to Europe in order to export natural gas and thus bringing huge profit to the Russian economy that at that time needed that injection, and it was in a desperate position. And they knew that this gas pipeline would be very profitable to the Soviet Union, but not only that, but it will also connect Europe to the Soviet Union in a way that will hinder all the American aspiration regarding the Soviet Union. And what they did, it was in fact the first cyber war in history. They learned that they are looking for software that will control all the apparatus of the gas pipeline, and they supplied this software. Sounds familiar? Sounds familiar.
Okay.
And the American, actually, by a Canadian company, supplied this software to the Soviets. They installed it in the installation of this gas pipeline, and the outcome was huge explosion that at that time was considered to be the biggest non-nuclear explosion ever. And it diminished and eradicated completely the whole pipeline. And it contributed a lot to the downfall of the Soviet empire at that time. It's something that wasn't published and didn't get the right place in history where it should have.
Right.
Those are two considerable intelligence covert operations that I see is a turning point
in the course of history, really.
In the history. And the third one is the beepers in Israel. And why? Because it started, exactly as you said correctly, a domino effect. After the beepers, we've seen a huge attack by the Israeli Air Force on 1,600 targets at one night in Lebanon, across the board in Lebanon. Later on, the attack and killing of senior officials in Lebanon like Ibrahim Akil, like Mohammed Wahabi, and other senior officials. We haven't done it before. And of course, the highlight was in the 27th of September. It was the targeting Hassan Nasrallah himself. What happened afterwards is not just the tremendous blow to the Hezbollah. It started a domino effect. Syria downfall is affiliated directly with the downfall of Nasrallah and downfall of the Hezbollah. Otherwise, I don't see any way that Ashara, Julani, whatever he wants to call himself,
would have been able to rise to power.
Right.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was so quick and rapid derived from what have happened in Lebanon. Don't forget, the people or the body who came to save Assad at 2013 on the uprising in Syria was the Hezbollah. They saved him. And now there was no Hezbollah
to save him.
To save him.
Right.
And this is one of the reasons that this unbelievable collapse of the regime had happened so fast and so quickly, because they had nobody to count on. They didn't have the Hezbollah, they didn't have the Russians, and of course they did not have the Iranians. So the Beeper operation, although the Israeli chief of staff said, I think very, very unwisely, that you don't win a war with gadgets. Yes, you do.
You do, in fact.
In fact, you do.
And not only do you win a war, but you retrace geopolitics in the entire region.
Right. And what happened afterward, the aftermath, the after effect, it's like an earthquake. There's the huge earthquake, and then we see different earthquakes everywhere, is the downfall of the Axis. And this is due to the fact that they understood that the main proxy, which is the Hezbollah, which they had created for almost more than 30 years and invested about, some say about $500 billion in creating this monstrous entity on the border of Israel. I call it they created the world's biggest aircraft outside of the Israeli border. And it collapsed in more or less 10 days. 10 days, not more than that. Look what happened between Ukraine and Russia today. Almost 3 years of interaction and fighting and gaining some ground and losing some ground, and nothing really happens on the ground. And in 10 days, we actually changed completely the whole echo chamber here in the Middle East. And later on, of course, there was the effect of the attack on Iran. But we couldn't have carried out the attack on Iran if we hadn't eliminated the Hezbollah before.
If we hadn't chopped off one of its biggest tentacles, we couldn't have gotten to the actual head of the octopus that sits in Tehran. But I'm curious to hear from you, from your insider knowledge. Did the Mossad predict how much of a success this operation would be in terms of that geographical rewriting that you mentioned?
No. Nobody predicted the downfall of Syria. No one. It took everyone in a total surprise and in awe. This rapid collapse of the regime. So I don't think anyone in the Western intelligence organization had anticipated or predicted that this will be the outcome. We thought it's going to be an immense blow to the Hezbollah, of course, to the prestige, and of course to the echelon of commanders, because take into consideration the people who were hit by those beepers were all of them were commanders. It wasn't just the troops on the ground. All of them were commanders. Just imagine you eliminate about 4,500 commanders in 3 minutes. And let's not forget, the day after we followed that by with the other equipments as well. So in that sense, you eradicate very fast the command and control of the organization, and you put them in a turmoil that it's almost impossible to pull out of it. And that's exactly what happened. We know from today, from evidences, that Nasrallah was in a state of shock and in depression, and he was sure that this is the end of the story. Afterwards,
right.
Even his son testified that. He said, my father was completely shattered.
That's my next question, right? Beyond the technical aspect and the success of this operation, there's an element here, a huge element here of psychological warfare. And to give us a little bit of an insight of how this deeply destabilized the head of Hezbollah, Nasrallah, and their response in the few hours and days that followed.
There is a term in Arabic for a spy called jasus, which means somebody who's betraying you and spying. The worst thing that happened to them is that the aftermath of this successful attack was the realization they are so infiltrated from the inside that they can trust nobody. Just imagine 3 commanders are sitting in a post planning some sort of an operation, and they are looking to the side, and you see this guy next to him, and he's thinking, is he a jasus? And the other guy thinks the same about him. So we create a chaotic environment within the Hezbollah where everybody is suspecting everybody. And in that sense, it's almost impossible to carry out or to conduct any sort of major operation, a secret operation, because you never know if it's going to be leaked and how it's going to be leaked. I'm not just talking about on a technological level. I'm talking about the human resources.
Right.
Everybody thinks that the other guy is the jasus.
In terms of the human resources, you mentioned a possible leak. There was reports following that operation that the reason why it was actually put into effect in September was that there was a risk of it being uncovered. Is that true?
I don't know. I'm not in the business anymore for quite a few years, and I have no information except what I read and what I see on television and so. But it's very likely because this operation has quite a short shelf
life. Yeah.
Why? First of all, technologically, you need to have all sorts of technological, I would say, apparatus that will support the beepers, energy, battery, other stuff as well. Second, there is always a chance that something will go wrong with a certain instrument that will be taken into a lab for inspection. And when it is inspected in a lab, there is a chance that you will find those minimum grams of highly sophisticated explosive, but it's detectable in a lab. It's not detectable when you pass through a screening in airport or so on, because it was very, very sophisticated. But once you take it to a lab, it's a different story. And there's always this chance that it will happen. So I don't rule out the possibility that at a certain moment they have to weigh the options. Am I going to maintain it for the right time, or I might wait for the right time, but the right time will never occur,
right,
because of some sort of a malfunction or some sort of a problem or even suspicion. Let's not forget the idea of purchasing those very old, outdated beepers by the Hezbollah was because the Hezbollah suspected that Israel is monitoring their high sophisticated cell phones and so on. So they said to themselves, okay, let's go to the basic. Let's go to the letters. We cannot go to the letters, and we cannot go to the pigeon that carries the message and so on. But what is next? Those old beepers, 50 years old beepers, that nobody will even think of using them in modern times, 2024. And so that was the reason that Hezbollah had purchased them, in order to enhance the security level of the interaction between the operators. And that was a big mistake on their behalf. And Israel is always using mistakes. And there's a rule in espionage, in intelligence. Always look for the mistakes. Always find where is this place is not covered. And this is exactly what had happened. Israel traced this mistake made by the Hezbollah and immediately endorsed it and immediately managed to create some sort of a facility that will use that on our benefit.
When we're talking about the preparations for such an operation, we're talking about years in the making, I would assume. Give us a little bit of an insight of what that process looks like inside the Mossad when we're talking from, the initial idea to the moment of execution. Of course, I'm sure you can't give me all the details, but as much as possible.
I don't know the details because I'm not part of the Mossad anymore. I'm not involved in operations, and I wasn't involved in this operation at all. I'm a very nice veteran, and that's it. But it's not necessarily years of operations. Sometimes you try to take advantage of events that occur on the moment in order to use them in your benefit. Sometimes you trace an opportunity. Sometimes you trace people. Sometimes you trace some sort of engagement. And the trick is to know how to trace and to react very, very fast. Sometimes it takes weeks. Sometimes it takes months. And of course, there are also a long-term operation that takes years. I can assume that this certain operation did not take years.
When we're talking about the timing of the operation, it followed, you said we were able to essentially carry out a mass elimination of thousands of Hezbollah commanders within just 3 minutes. But that summer, there was a lot of eliminations that started also with a guest house in Tehran. How much of that momentum played into this to the success of this operation from a psychological standpoint? I mean, when it comes to Israel's enemies and the message that Israel broadcasted with the success of all these different Mossad operations.
When you are trying to conduct a Mossad operation, of course, the psychological impact on your enemy is extremely important when you're trying to put it on a time frame, okay? Where is the right moment that the impact will be the biggest? But sometimes it contradicts operational level, or sometimes you cannot really maneuver the events in your favor in order to portray the most, I would say, extravagant impact on the psychological level. It's sort of a game that you're trying to play. Sometimes you have to say, okay, I will give the benefit to the operational side because I have right now the time frame and the window for opportunity rather than the psychological effect. What we have seen in those things that you mentioned is a very rare, I would say, a combination of operation and the psychological effect. It doesn't happen all the time. When it happened in those cases, it was an immense impact, not just only on the Hezbollah, but on everyone who was looking at the Hezbollah and thinking, is this the proxy that I have created? Is this the monster? Is this the wolf, or is it a sheep? Is this what I've been investing for 30 years? And in the end of the day, 5,000 more even of the elite commanders are just like that disappear.
It's like a deck of cards that
Right.
came crumbling down.
Right. And so the psychological effect was in this certain operation was enormous.
And it wasn't just a psychological effect on Israel's enemies, but it was also its allies, other actors here that are very much active in the Middle East, who all of a sudden recalculated their moves, saying, wait a second, Israel actually is not, like you said, a sheep that's been wounded on October 7th, which was kind of the image that we had broadcasted. But it reclaimed its image as really a powerhouse, a lion in the Middle East of don't mess with us.
There's a saying in the Bible that once there will be, the sheep will live together with the wolf and together in harmony and peace and so on. I always prefer to be, in that case, the wolf. And usually they live in harmony in the wolf's stomach. So the effect was also on all the neighbors, surrounding neighbors that were looking at what is happening right now in the Middle East and thinking of them to themselves, who is the superpower in the area? Who is the big guy with a stick that I can trust? And they were looking, by the way, at the American stand. Remember the Biden administration, and even before that at Obama, who had almost, I would say, betrayed them. They betrayed them across the board. And they said, who can we count on when we are threatened by enemies? And the imminent enemy, of course, is Iran. And they say only Israel. Israel is the only superpower in the area that we really can count on. Israel is the only superpower in the area who is willing to confront the Iranians, who is willing to confront the worst terrorists that human nature have ever encountered with. So right now, after seeing what are the real capabilities of the Israelis, they are more certain that the affiliation with Israel is the right thing to do.
And I think when we're talking about that restoration of trust, it also concerns the Israeli public, right? Following October 7th, which really had lost any sort of confidence, less so in the Mossad, more into the internal security. But there wasn't much confidence in Israel's intelligence community and the military. How did this operation and the series of operations that followed before and after sort of restore that trust between the Israeli public and the security apparatus?
It's a very good question, Sarah. In I would say, generally speaking, it restored the trust of the Israeli public in the intelligence and in the IDF, and of course in the Mossad itself, because first of all, let's not forget the Mossad was not involved in the 7th of October disaster.
Right.
Mossad was completely detached from the events that led to the 7th of October and the aftermath, of course, and the actual events, because the Mossad generally is dealing with outside external enemies, while the Shin Bet is in charge. And in fact, it was from 2013 in charge completely on Gaza, which was, of course, a big mistake and the big collapse of all the concepts and everything. But the Mossad was outside of this story. So in a way, the Mossad was not affected by the mistrust of the Israeli public on the intelligence and the IDF. Nevertheless, the Mossad is part of the intelligence community.
Right.
And being a part of the intelligence community, we also share some of the, I would say, malfunctions that had happened. Now, all those operations, I'm talking about those 10 days between 17 and the 27th of September, restored in the public image a confidence in the intelligence. They don't say they are blind anymore. They don't say they were fooled. They won't say they were manipulated. We see a completely different approach. And also, let's not forget another thing. It restored the self-esteem of the intelligence services, the Israeli intelligence services, which was a downfall, a complete destruction of self-esteem. They stopped to believe in themselves. And this was more important right now. They started to believe that they are capable. They started to believe that they can bring a great intelligence in real time in order to facilitate attacks. Remember this huge attack that the Israeli Air Force had carried out on the 18th of September was due to the intelligence that was gathered. And so also the self-esteem of the intelligence services themselves was an important factor that we have seen later on that it contributed to the success on the attack on Iran and even in Gaza.
Oded Ailam, as always, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much for having me, and Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.